A lot is going on in the world, including that debate. Because yes, I did actually wind up watching part of that debate and have a question for Sasha if he comes through and all along those lines. Because actually, two places that he is involved with were actually mentioned in that particular debate. That being Canada and of course Ukraine. So that is something that was going on, and I'll be interested to see if he makes it in his thoughts around some of those things that were going on as well. So it does look like a lot of people are saying that Trump has a sizable lead and that the debate did very little to give people traction and all along those lines. But folks are saying that DeSantis was strong, Haley was sharp, and apparently they just thought Ramaswamy was very loud. But we'll be seeing what other folks thought in all in that space, and definitely. Folks were trying to get traction, including Tim Scott and Chris Christie, who I believe have to make the next threshold to be on the debate stage. So we were down to five, since some folks have dropped out and some folks did not make the threshold. So it'll be interesting to see where this all goes, and maybe we'll be down to three or four, maybe even two the next time around, and all along those lines. So it'll be quite interesting to see what goes on in that space. And along those lines, I do see that I've got my guest with me, so we're going to be talking about with him about some things as well. But before I get to that, definitely wanted to mention some other things that were going on in the world outside of that debate. And one of the things he talks about, Mr. Nevin, is uh, demographics and some of the better things that we might be seeing. And he's written a book, so we'll be talking about that as well. But definitely a lot of folks were paying attention to that particular debate and all in that way. Definitely Nashville is in the news for two reasons, and neither one of them are all that great. The Nashville police are saying that seven are on administrative assignment after the purported leak of the Christian school shooters manifesto. So that is something that is going on in that space as they are continuing that investigation. And there is also a college student in critical condition in that particular city after being hit by a stray bullet in a Nashville park. So the Nashville DA is saying that the law must be altered after a suspect was released from jail is accused of the shooting. So apparently he'd already been in jail, was released, and now he's been suspected or accused of that particular shooting. So definitely that is something that we are seeing in the news as well. And the man accused of attacking Paul Pelosi is and stirring up right-wing conspiracies is facing a San Francisco jury. So the federal trial of the Pelosi attack suspect is renewing focus on political violence. So yes, there can be a notion of even violence that is politically motivated and all in that space. And over there in Mississippi, Governor Tate Reeves defeats Brandon Presley to secure his final term as governor. And some folks are wondering why a certain part of the area ran out of ballots. So apparently, a heavily African American county, Hinds County, which is definitely one of the large counties, ran out of ballots. And I'm sure there'll be some accusations around that as well. And of course, there was the Ivanka Trump testimony that is going on. And some folks are saying that the email that she has could undo her family's entire defense. So that is something that we're seeing, as she even testified that she got her advice from husband Jared Kushner on real estate financing deals. So that is going on with that New York fraud trial. So that is something else in the news. And apparently, there is a major brothel thing that is going on as well, and that is going on with some people that are being accused of being involved in a major brothel takedown and all in that space. I want to say that that was in the Northeast. Um, and definitely, it looks like that'll be in the news, and folks will be investigating that because they're saying that high end brothels were used by elected officials and executives, and the DOJ has announced arrests in a high end brothel network used by elected officials, military officers, and others. And that was in Massachusetts, where three have been charged with running a commercial sex ring. So that is something else that we are seeing as well. And in a lot of the election news, people are saying that the abortion issue was one of the issues that might have led to some of the Democratic wins. So that might be something that we get into in conversation as well. And the House Oversight Committee is subpoenaing Hunter and James Biden. So that is going on. So there are some impeachment inquiries going on in that kind of way. So we'll see what this goes on and if this gets any traction as well. And apparently, there are some folks that are saying that James Comer, like Joe Biden, also paid his brother $200,000. So there's a number of things going on in that space as well. I'm going to get to some world issues and I'm going to bring my guest on to talk about some of the demographics in his book and all in that space. The U.S. has carried out airstrikes in eastern Syria, and that is something that we saw in the news as well, as it is hitting Iran-linked facility in Syria and all in that space. So definitely that is going on from our military standpoint. And the Qatar is mediating the release of 10 to 15 captives for a short ceasefire. So that is something that is going on. And Cairo is closing in on securing a deal on a humanitarian pause and prisoner swap, even though Hamas is said to discuss freeing some hostages and more. So definitely it looks like Israel and Hamas nearly struck a deal to free up to about 50 hostages. And thousands of Palestinians are fleeing south on foot as Israel steps up offensive in Gaza City. So Israel strikes pound Gaza City as ground forces battle Hamas near a major hospital and all in that kind of way. So that's something that's going on. And if you're wondering about those lovely robots, well, it looks like there's some sad news in that regards, because a robot crushed a worker to death at a packing plant in South Korea. So apparently the robot crushed the man to death, mistook him for a box of vegetables, according to the report that is coming out in that area and all along those lines. If you're wondering about some other armed kind of military things that are in the robotic space, it's also drone attacks, and armed drones have strike on U.S. troops at a Iraq's military base. So that is something that we are seeing as U.S. forces were under fire in the Middle East, as America apparently is sliding toward the brink of being involved in that particular conflict as well. And apparently the private jets of Russian oligarchs are keep flying, but not to Europe. So definitely looks like they have got some clipped wings going on in terms of where they can go and all in that space. And U.S. Reaper drones shot down over Yemen by an Iran-backed Houthi rebels. So U.S. Reaper drones were definitely shot down, and U.S. has launched, like I said earlier, a retaliatory airstrike in Syria. So that is something that we are seeing as well. So definitely Ukraine is saying Russian missiles hit a civilian vessel in Black Sea and apparently killed at least one victim in that particular area as well. And a Russian missile apparently hit a Liberia flagship in Odessa, Ukraine's main Black Sea port, and all along those lines. So that's just some of the things that I'm seeing in the news. We'll get to some other things as well. Just really quickly let you know, a Panama protester was shot dead by a driver after blocking the road. And we know that there have been some blocked roads here as well in some of the protests around Palestine and around the war there in Israel. As a matter of fact, I think we had one last week here in Durham, North Carolina. I think some of those people have actually faced some prosecution now as well. But I'm going to get to Alan Nevin, and of course we've got our guest as well, but that was just some of the news that was there. But let me bring in Alan Nevin, our guest, and all in that space. But how are you doing, Mr. Nevin? Glad to have you here with us and everything. And I know
Thank you.
going on with demographics, and you've actually said some stuff about how things could be doing better in terms of certain areas. I think Florida, you have some good news for it, and California, and even Texas, and even the area that I am in, North Carolina, because I'm looking at your book, it looks like you were thinking that there could be some good things in that space, but that single family homes might be a thing of the past, if I understood your book and all along those lines. But I'd love to hear more about the book and some of the other things that you've got on mind that we might be looking at. And you even had some of the demographics around Russia as well. So then, so how that might be impacting us. I'd love to hear about the book and what you've got going.
Well, the book looks at the next half century around the world. And I do have a whole chapter on the South Atlantic region here in the United States. And North Carolina is one of the superstars in the next half century. that just because of your wonderful education system, particularly, of course, in the universities, and the I will say the work ethic of your population in North Carolina, that you are going to be one of the hot states for the next half century, and as well as the states of South Carolina and Georgia. And they don't get enough publicity about what's going on there. And I think it's very, very positive. But in the big picture, the United States is in an amazingly good position. We are the orchestra leader for the world. And a lot of people take pot shots at us. But the reality is that we are the heart of the financial world. Something like 80% of all international transactions take place with a dollar attached to it. And the thesis of the book is that the countries that are now third world, Africa and others, over the next couple of decades are starting to move towards second world countries. And the reason is that they're starting to do manufacturing. And the other big part of it has to do with demographics. And that is these third world countries where they traditionally had fertility rates of like 6 or 7 kids, they've determined uniformly that they want to be part of a better world. And what has happened is just, and this is really modern, in the last very few years, they've been able to access the web. And they see how the first world countries live, and they want to be like us. So they are reducing the number of children they're having, basically almost from 6 down to 3, which means that they have a lot more money available for education and to live better and to own cars. And that is happening with a couple of billion people. And one of the things that is making that happen is that it's become so expensive to manufacture in China that China is farming out their manufacturing to these countries, these third world countries. And they're taking advantage of it. After the next time you go into your Target or Walmart or a Costco store, go to the clothing section and take a look at the labels. And you'll see where 10 years ago they were basically all made in China. Now you see made in Vietnam, made in a number of countries that are third world. And that's helping them move forward. And then you have the second world countries like China and India that also are moving forward toward first world countries. It's going to take them a while, I'll admit that. But the reality is that they're moving forward. Now, China has a big problem, and it's demographics. They don't have enough household formation because of that one-child policy that was put in 1980. And it was only taken off in 2016, but there was this basically 30-year period where they only had one kid. And the result of that is that now here we sit in a period where they desperately want to add households, and there's just not enough kids. There are not enough people getting married. There's not enough kids having enough people having children, and China is not in a good position, unfortunately. India, on the other hand, continues to have a lot of kids, and they are moving forward. You know, the image that we have seen typically ballyhooed in India is you see poverty-stricken people. Uh, but when you travel to India, uh, you see a different picture. You see cities that have high rises and universities, and they are moving forward very nicely. And their fertility rate is such that they continue to add households. And that's very good for India and good for the world, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, one of the things I know you've been talking about in your book, and if you'd say the title of the book, that would be great as well, is this notion of the rise of technology. You kind of alluded to it even in some of these third world countries, but I know a lot of times people have been, putting negative spin on some of the rise in technology. There's definitely been conversations around how AI may displace workers, and that's even been at the core of some of the strikes that have gone on. I understand the screen actors and some of those folks in the Hollywood industry recently just got off of strike and all in that space. But I was just wondering from a demographic standpoint and even a standpoint of looking at the future, because I do know that the book is talking about the next half century. I think that's even in the title and everything, that it is definitely some thoughts around the rise of technology and what that can mean for the world population. But what is your thoughts around that, and what does the book seem to be saying?
Well, of course, the technology has just been wonderful for the world. When you think of everything that has been created in terms of technology in the last 50 years, uh, computers, software, it's all been very good for us. Now, AI is a different creature and it will get controlled. Right now, it's wide open and it's fun to use. And but right now, everybody's saying it's a job killer, and it may kill some jobs, but the reality is that it will come under control. And you know, everybody talks about students using it to write term papers. The reality is that happens, but the minute the teacher asks a question about the term paper and the student doesn't know the answer, they'll know it was AI that wrote the paper. So that'll get on under control. Right now, it's a little bit under control, under controlled.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I can definitely see that. What are some of the other trends that you see? Because I know one of the authors that we have here on a regular basis, he's part of our Economic Monday, talks about America a superpower and whether we will remain a superpower. And there seems to be some questions that David Walker brings up in his conversation around that as to whether we will remain a superpower. So he even talks about it being a dysfunctional superpower. But what is your thoughts around the USA role and things in that space? So are we still maintaining our superpower status, or are we about to be kind of replaced by, say, an India or some of the BRICS nations or some of the others that are out there that are trying to change the narrative?
We're the orchestra leader, and we will remain the orchestra leader indefinitely. There really is no place like the United States. And I've traveled the world pretty much. I've been through the Far East, Europe, and there's just not a place that has the degree of capitalism that we have. And when you just take a look, for instance, at the West Coast, and you think of all the things that have been created between the state of Washington and the state of California, the Apples, the Googles, the Facebooks, these aren't showing up as creations of other countries. And the reality is that the world really relies on the United States because our brand of capitalism is pretty remarkable. And we see we see that because we have literally millions of folks who come here to the United States to study and learn what we teach. No one can match our educational system at the college level. And when I look at immigration, we legally immigrate 1 million people a year to the United States. And they're coming from all over the world. And it's wonderful. We need them. We need their brain power. And then some go back home, wherever home happens to be, to help them move forward. And we see this remarkable advances that have been taking place around the world because of what we in the United States have created. Now, I'm not saying that other countries don't create things. It's just that we do it with such huge enterprises that it's tough for other countries to emulate. And the result of that is that we will stay on top. Certainly, we dominate the financial world. I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, and New York still remains the center of the financial world. And when I look at all the things that have been created in the last 50 years, it's really pretty amazing. And the result of that is that we wind up being world leaders. And I don't see a situation where there's somebody else who's going to move into first position. So what I'd like to see, and I think we're going to see it in the next 50 years, is just a lot of countries moving forward and there will be some move into first world positions. Certainly, the European Union is natural to be first world, and most of their countries in the 29 countries of the European Union are first world now. But there are a number of them that are now still second world, and they're moving up to first world. It's going to take them a couple of decades, but they're going to be there. And certainly in the Far East, first world countries, you have Japan and Korea and Taiwan, and they're on top of things. Now, their only problem, I will tell you, in countries like Japan and Korea, is that their fertility rate is so low. They just don't have enough kids to keep their machines going, which is why Japan, for instance, Toyota has plants 125 countries around the world because they just don't have enough kids growing up in Japan or Korea to manufacture the goods that they've created. Just when we look at just the last decade and see the wonderful automobiles that Korea has created, and now Vietnam has a car they've created, but they can't make the numbers work by manufacturing them in their countries. And remember, it's been noted recently that China is about to start manufacturing cars in Mexico so they can bring them north of the border as part of NAFTA. And that is happening. And Vietnam has introduced their first vehicle here in the United States, and they're starting to rent showroom space, and it's an electric car. So we're seeing all these really wonderful things coming out of these first world countries that unfortunately don't have enough kids, and they can't get immigration because the countries have completely different languages, not only to speak, but to read and write. Whereas English is really pretty easy to learn. Berlitz can make you a totally fluent English speaker in 60 days. And that's why we legally immigrate 1 million people a year. And we have, by the way, We talked sometimes about President Trump, who sat on immigration. Didn't really happen. We have for at least 30 years, have been legally immigrating 1 million people a year. Uh, Mathematically speaking, we need another 500,000, and they're all lined up at the Mexican border to come across. The answer is we need more people here because you and I, our kids, are not going to mow our lawns or do the kind of work that needs to be done. So we need more people. We have 330 million people in the country, and we need more. That's why our unemployment rate is below 4% right now, and below 4% is essentially zero. And we have now, when I look at the numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics every month, they're showing there are 10 million job openings in the United States. And that's been that way for several years. They just can't fill them. And particularly retailing and entry-level jobs, not enough people. And it is unfortunate. But states that have the most job openings, like North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia and Florida, they have a tough time. When you go to a shopping center, almost all the stores have a sign that says "Now Hiring," and they are. They just can't get enough entry-level labor. And when you look at even the high-end employers, whether it's Google or Apple, go on their website and take a look at what they're paying entry-level jobs, typically six figures. It's pretty good.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that you're raising. I'm going to bring in Sasha and Jatopia and maybe even Nick, one of the founders of the network as well. But one of the things I was curious about is we're hearing a lot of people that are talking about this notion of forcing people back into the workforce and all along those lines to go back to the offices, because there's been a lot of hybrid work where people have been working from home or working from a combination of home and the office. But I know a lot of the offices, including some of those companies that you just mentioned, are wanting their workers to actually come back into the workforce. Do you think that is something that we will see? And along those same lines, like I said, I watched the debate yesterday, and a number of the candidates were painting the economic picture as being very harsh. And I do understand part of that is political posturing and all in that kind of way. But I'm just wondering, because you seem to think that the economy is better than we are actually being told, and there's a lot of doom and gloom from both the Republicans and the Democrats. But I was just wondering your thoughts around this notion of the economy not being in good shape.
I watch that fairly carefully, and the going back to the office is something that'll gradually happen. And the reality is that if you're running a company and you bring in new people and there's nobody in the office, it's very difficult for those new people to acclimate to the environment, and they can't learn the business. And how do you move up in management if you're working out of your house and nobody can see what you're doing? So I think gradually you're going to start seeing people come back to the office, and they are already. But the possibility of spending your life working at home with your laptop, that's not a logical possibility for the United States.
Well, I know that one of the things I'm going to bring up, Sasha, and he had some background lives in Canada now, but was involved with Russian military at one point and is actually originally from Ukraine. So he's very adamantly pro-Ukraine and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, because I do know that in the book you talk about the Russian economy, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about the Russian economy versus the United States economy. And Sasha may have some thoughts around that as well, as he spent some time there. But when I found out about you and was able to get you for this show, I did see that you had some parallels between what is happening here and what is happening in Russia and what they might need to do to improve their economy other than in this war, which is an obvious.
Well, Russia has been dying since World War II. And the reality is they lost 25 million people in World War II, most of which were male. And the result of that, of course, is that their fertility rate is one of the lowest of any of the first world countries by far. And they are in desperate shape. Their college educated population has made a beeline to get out of Russia. And that's not it's not a difficult thing to do, because when you look at the countries that are right next to Russia, whether it's Finland or Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they welcome the Russian, because most of the ones that are leaving Russia are the educated, and Russia just doesn't have enough good jobs to keep the educated at home. And they are in desperate shape for even entry-level jobs. When you look at, for instance, Russia is a huge supplier of grain, mostly on the western end of Russia. And they bring in people from China to harvest their grain. They just don't have enough people. So the politics there, of course, are not brilliant, but they have a much bigger problem, and it relates to keeping their economy growing when you don't have anywhere near as many people as you need.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Nick, I know you've probably gone out and got the book, because you oftentimes will get the book if Shaquille's not here to buy the book in that space. But I definitely know that you will do that and probably have already done it and everything.
Okay, the book I already checked it out. I already bought it on Amazon. It's available. It's called The Next Half Century, available on Amazon.com. And I'm dying to read the book because, of course, yes, we do have a show with the Honorable David Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and we bring in, obviously some of the problems that the United States has, and this one is a big one. I don't know if you discussed it in your book. We have a U.S. debt of 31 trillion, now growing to 33 trillion, and an administration that can't find a dollar that they don't want to spend, and they continually add to the debt. Now, granted, the U.S. is in a good position today, but if you follow what happened to Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, larger than Saudi Arabia, and overnight, because of their hubris, the country fell apart. So there's nothing that I see that says the United States, when they're building in intrinsic problems due to overspending for things that they shouldn't. Well, one thing they shouldn't do is they shouldn't spend $56 billion on the chip industry. Yeah, it helps you guys in California and Intel, but listen, it doesn't help the average American to make the people from Intel rich. And I know you love Facebook and you like Amazon, all those West Coast companies. But if you look at how they made their money, Facebook, by driving competitors out and being monopoly, Google the same thing. And finally, the Justice Department got off their rears and sued them. They're just taking advantage of consumers. And no one tells people that the average American, I'm talking 70%, not the people that live in San Diego where you live, the top 10%, 70% of Americans can't get a hold of $1,000 in the event of an emergency. How come do we have a system that glorifies Taylor Swift and Beyonce and those people can't get a hold of $1,000. Then we go further. It just goes on. Medicare goes broke this decade. Social Security broke the next decade. So as we're building these intrinsic problems in, what we're looking for is to allow China or India to take place to be the superpower in America. And like I said, it may not affect the top 10% of the people that live in the Southern California area, but they're not the rest of the United States. And you just go on further. 100,000 deaths in fentanyl. Why doesn't our politicians address this? So as I'm looking at some of these problems that we're seeing in the United States, we're just not addressing them, And so, yeah, like I said, I'm dying to read the book. I want to see why we're going to
be. Nick, just really quickly, I just wanted to hear if Alan had any thoughts about that, because definitely there are. He's kind of, and part of the things that he talked about, and you actually just kind of did what I heard about when I even invited Alan, which is there are a number of people that talk about the doom and gloom aspect of the United States and all along those lines, but don't maybe highlight some of the other aspects. So what is your answer to those folks like Nick that will point out to the negative aspects of what is going on in our economy or with our situations and all along those?
Let me just address two of the items. The first is when Bill Clinton got out of office, we had no national debt.
He balanced the budget. He did have a debt. He just balanced the budget.
Okay. It really started building up during the Obama period. And the reality is that a big part of that debt relates to the fact that we haven't increased the takeout on Social Security. We need to dramatically increase the takeout of ordinary individuals. There's no reason in the world why they should stop taking it out of your salary when you hit age 65, when those are your usually highest income years. So we need to do things like that will help us curb the $33 trillion debt. And it's a problem. We'll live through it. The other thing I did want to mention, you talk about folks not being able to come up with $1,000. That's really hokey. We have 70% of the people in this country own their own home, and a large percentage of them have no debt. So when you say they can't come up with $1,000, that's bogus. They can do that any day of the week they want to refinance. And that is true. There are a lot of people who can't come up with 1,000, but it's a relatively small percent of the population.
Not to counter your argument, Counselor, but in the state that you live in, California, which differs from the rest of the United States, the demographics show 33% of all homes are bought with all cash. But the number dwindles down to 20% or less around the United States. And also, home ownership doesn't necessarily mean they have any equity in their home. So, and these are not my figures that I'm coming up with. This is another study that came up with this 70% of the population can't come up with $1,000. And then there's another demographic that shows that our K through 12 education under the PISA scores, the United States doesn't even enter in the top 25. So how can we move ahead or stay as a global superpower when our K through 12 education doesn't even rank in the top 25 in the world? That's a question, by the way.
No, we have a problem in K to 12. There's no question about it. And when you look at it, what you see is there are selected zip codes, I'll say, that have very good K to 12 education. And they tend to be bi-coastal. And if you're in North Carolina, they have a wonderful K to 12 program. So does Virginia. But there are a number of states that don't. Here in California, it's hit or miss. I live in a zip code that has a wonderful K to of education system, but I can take you to other zips in San Diego County where it's not so good. And we need to improve it all around the United States. And we just haven't put our mind to it.
Hey, Mr. Nivens, you mentioned something I was actually going to ask Sasha, but I'll actually ask you as well, because you talked about the immigration aspect of the rise in the economy and the need for some of the labor and some of the labor coming from different places and everything. And we've heard even in the debate about the fentanyl crisis and things of that nature. One of the things that I found interesting was that one of the candidates, Ramaswamy, actually said that he wanted to close the border, not just from Mexico, but also from Canada, because he was saying that the flow is coming from both sides to the United States. But I just wondering your thoughts around attempts to make the immigration tighter and all along those lines, and if that's something that would make us a better economy or a worse economy, and it would help, because you talked about a number of places that are doing good demographically, and we are definitely seeing an influx of people from Mexico, from Venezuela, and from a number of other places, even some of those African nations that you mentioned as well. But I just wondering your thoughts when you hear politicians that are wanting to secure the border, and not just one border, not just the southern border, but like I said, Mr. Ramaswamy did say that he would like to secure it from the north as well.
You know, we don't get that many out of Canada. Canada is on a path of growth. They are allowing in 400,000 people a year now. They need to keep their population growing, and they have a fertility problem as well. But there are not that many from Canada who immigrate down to us. The big problem, and it is a problem, when we go to the border on the south end, you have literally hundreds of thousands of people working their way up from Central America, Venezuela, among others, Colombia, and they're at the border. They've done a remarkable thing in terms of coming across the entire country of Mexico to get to our border. And we just can't let everybody in. We just can't do it. And I'm not so sure I know how to deal with that.
Jacoby, you look like you had a question or a thought and everything. So I was going to raise thoughts to you, and definitely also Sasha may have some thoughts as well. But definitely, I saw you having that look, and then I see Sasha's got his hand up.
Well, we'll let Sasha go first.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. I would like to ask you about the vision of a foreign policy of the United States overall, and therefore its military budget, which quite mysterious to me, without any stated policy in foreign relation. The budget is reaching $1 trillion annually. Now, if the goal of the United States is stay within its borders, and then all you need is maybe $50 million, not even $1 billion, to defend against Mexico and Canada, and that's more than enough money. So when your projected budget is almost $1 trillion, then it supposedly should have some aspirations in the foreign affairs and the theater, which is now obviously number one is Russia against Ukraine, number two is now just recently Israel versus Gaza, or Hamas, if you will. And the approach is quite worrisome. For example, with Ukraine, the United States assured Zelensky and the Ukrainian government that there will be a constant military and financial help, and therefore Ukrainian commanders figured out the plan of attack starting in June of this year, and they have not received all the weapons and ammunition what they needed. So this attack unfortunately faded, and right now they are in extremely difficult situation where they may not have any further help from the United States. They are facing still very, very strong opponent, which is Russia. And now, in this situation, even to achieve any peace agreement for Ukrainians is very problematic. And in Israel, they sent two carriers groups. They're like sitting there like a sitting ducks, really. And the Hezbollah and others are attacking U.S. positions every day. There are already more than 40 U.S. Soldiers are wounded, and it keeps going on. So, and because again, this policy, maybe Biden has something in his mind, and he doesn't want others to know about it. So we are all millions of people in the West, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, we are wondering what is that all about? How to make any sense of what's going on? I don't know. Maybe you don't have an answer to that, but maybe you do. Please, I'm very interested to know it.
You know, it's really pretty unusual for us to have to support two wars simultaneously. I'm not so sure I know a point in our history where we've had to do that. And in terms of Ukraine, I think the European Union has to put up a lot more money than they've been putting up, because pretty much we've been the sole provider of arms for the Ukraine. I have no idea how that's going to shake out. And as far as Israel, that'll come to an end, and it won't be that far away from now. Obviously, Israel has been supporting financially the Gaza for decades, if you will. And it's a very interesting situation over there, because Israel obviously is surrounded on both, well, really on three sides, by folks who aren't particularly friendly. And I don't see that situation changing that much. I don't see where the West Bank is all of a sudden going to become lovey-dovey with Israel. I just think it's a long-term problem that's not going to be solved by us. And Israel just would be very happy if Gaza went away.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Toby? I know that you are very much in the North Carolina economic development space and everything along those lines. So I think you might have some thoughts around that, because I did hear Mr. Nevin say that North Carolina is positioned to do great, and both you and I are here in North Carolina in terms of a economic power in terms of the United States. So I didn't know if you had any questions for Mr. Nevin in that regards.
I mean, just a couple of things to touch on, because I think Nick dropped in a few things. The economy piece, which we've discussed ad nauseum in terms of how everything touches together, and then then the same thing with the education system, where the education system is still subpar. However, the first thing that we tend to cut in terms of finances is the education system. In terms of balancing the budget, which Nick brought up, saying that the current administration, well, historically speaking, in recent history, how I know, Alan, you brought up Clinton. Those who balance the budgets happen to be the Democrat presidents who, Democrat administrations have balanced the budget, and then Republican administrations have come in and blown the budget. Just case in point, Trump putting up 25% of the that $1 trillion budget, which is out there. So just recent history, complaining about the current administration, saying that they're spending too much. Well, they're covering for the COVID and so on and so forth. And then the Venezuela thing, Venezuela placed all their, same thing with Chile, how they placed all their bags in the oil budget. Well, Rick and Morty, actual interesting cartoon that has gone over changes, which were great changes, because the individual who was the main voice, was a bad person, but so glad he's gone. But they did a piece where they talked about how to ruin an economy, and all they changed was the main investment of that economy. They dropped that value down, and that ruined the whole country, or ruined that economy of that intercontinental place that they were working against. And that's basically what happened with Venezuela and Chile, where they placed all their investment in oil and the oil price dropped. So then, okay, you lose a lot of money that way. But in terms of chips and everything else, the diverse economy that the U.S. is based in is not going to hit a problem based on chips. And that's actually where I wanted to go to, because Alan, you had talked about AI and the future of AI. And I know Disney got in some hot water for utilizing AI to recreate the actors in some of their films already. And that was what the Screen Actors Guild, that was a big piece, along with bumping up the pay. And the same thing with the writers. Dealing with AI, in your opinion, and looking towards the future, because government entities are going to utilize AI, and there's no way around it. I mean, from targeting systems, be it in war. How do you feel AI in a government statistical way, or a government usage, will be utilized for a positive? And what ways do you believe that AI, that we can protect from AI that will be used in a negative?
Okay. I have good faith, if you will, in our federal government. And, the top may change, but the vast majority of federal employees don't change. And for instance, the IRS has had a shortage of personnel for more than a decade now. They need to hire, literally, maybe more than 100,000 people just to make that machine run. And if they can use AI to make that happen, that's fine. But a lot of the federal government is desperate for new employees, and they just can't seem to get them. And I don't particularly understand that. I happen to have grown up in Washington, D.C., back when there was completely dominated by the federal government. And it was an employer of first choice. Now it's not that, because the folks in the U.S. have such incredible opportunities in other companies, in other industries, that the federal employment is no longer glamorous.
Yeah, along those same lines, do you think that we're doing a good enough job? You talked about demographics of training people in the new fields. I know that there have been some pushes to get people involved in technology and involved in aspects of technology, even from some of our minority communities and some of our other communities as well. But as one that is doing these studies, do you feel that we are doing a good enough job to get people into some of the new fields of development in the United States?
Yeah, we're relying to some degree on the folks coming here. Interesting stats came out recently on the percent of population that is foreign born.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look, it's somewhat amazing, the San Jose area, which is more or less the cradle of the software world, 45% of their population is foreign born. Here in San Diego, we're 25% is foreign born. And that's allowed our machine to work, because it's the educated foreign born that are coming here And we really can't continue to expand our economies without them coming here.
Are we doing enough, speaking of foreign born, to get relationships with other parts of the world? You mentioned some countries, including some in Africa, that are going from third world to second world, and some of the second world countries that are now moving into first world. Do you feel that we are doing enough of a relationship building with some of these countries? Because one of the things that I've been hearing is that a lot of people are concerned that China is doing a real good job of going to those countries, but maybe the United States isn't doing as strong a job. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that, and is that an area that we could improve on?
Well, I think the reality is that these third world countries now have access to the web, if you will, and they can become educated without having to move here. And that is what's happening. They are self-educating because they have, in most part, IQ levels that will allow them to understand what we already understand here in our country in terms of jobs that are more akin to first world countries than first world countries. So it's a matter of time. It's not going to happen overnight. But the reality is that they are now taking advantage of software to become educated.
Yeah, but don't you think Alvin's okay? The reason why you're getting a lot better people is that your demographic pool is bigger. For example, and we do this in the chess world that Sasha and I swim in. And the chess players, when they recruit people today for chess scholarships, they recruit worldwide. Now, when the minute you recruit worldwide, you have an 8 billion person population to recruit from, as opposed to the United States, around 300 million. And the top chess players that now get scholarships are from around the world, from India, from China, from Germany, and some from the United States. So if the United States attracts top talent and you're dealing with a bigger pool, you're obviously going to get better people. So Silicon Valley attracts around the world. And so no doubt, 45% will come from outside the United States. The United States doesn't even have close to 45% of the population. But the reason I'm dying to read your book is the demographics I see are going that way, and you're saying that way. Glad you have the power of positive thinking on your side. The U.S. at the end of World War II, we had 50% of the GDP in the world. Now we're down to 25%. So you're telling me in the next half century we're going to stay even, which would be good, or are we going to go down? I got to read your book, so I want to see the power of positive thinking in this particular area. And then there's two demographics I look at. The U.S. GDP, 25% of our GDP is the U.S. government. My interaction as an attorney with the U.S. government is not favorable. Okay, a lot of the people that work for the U.S. government are designed to do one thing: maintain their jobs and look like a superhero by maintaining their jobs. So and 25% of the GDP is spent on government employees. A lot of them go after my clients who work in private industry and have no clue how private industry work because they're always employees of the federal government. So anyway, that's my thoughts on them. I'd like to see them shrink dramatically. Then another GDP issue I see: 20% of our GDP is spent in the United States on healthcare. So 45% of all of our money is spent on two items: one, a bloody government employee in Washington, D.C., and two, a healthcare provider who's there taking care of you. Where's the room for everybody else when everybody's becoming a government employee or they're working in the healthcare industry to take care of sick people?
You know, I think it's a tragedy that healthcare takes up that much of our economy. It does uniformly more than twice the percentage of European Union. They typically are spending 7 to 10% of their GDP on healthcare, and like you say, we're actually 17 or 18%. There's no reason for that because it has been shown uniformly that our health isn't any better than the Europeans. And I'm afraid it is really up to the federal government to change the game in healthcare, and they just have not been willing to take it on.
What do you see as some of the trends? I know we're getting to wind down and everything, but I'm just wondering, what do you see in the book are some of the trends that you are seeing that are positive, that give you this idea of where America will be in the next 50 years or the next half a century and all in that space? I was just wondering, what are some of the trends that folks can expect to be seeing if they are to go out on Amazon or some of the other sources and get your book?
Yeah, well, we will continue to grow, and I do not suspect that we will be able to maintain 25% of the world's GNP. That would be a terrible thing, because that means that the other countries aren't growing. So I'm looking at us having a lesser percent of the GNP, but continued growth. And there are a couple of areas that we have to work on. I think the biggest one is healthcare. I think there's no reason for our healthcare to be as expensive. And the problem is, in addition to that, not everybody's getting good healthcare. It's unfortunate. And I wish I had the answer for you on that, but I don't. But we have to bring that down. In terms of government serving the people, by and large, it's been pretty good. Most people in this country live a pretty good life. Yes, there's a percent that don't, but we do a pretty good job.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely appreciate your being on. I know we're going to wrap up and everything. If you can tell folks once again how you can be reached and any other thoughts that you have that we've not addressed that you think would be of interest to the population and all along those lines, because definitely I'm glad that you're thinking that North Carolina and Virginia and our South Atlantic area is going to be one of the growth areas and all in that space, because I've heard some people that have been concerned that we have lost some industries, including tobacco and the coastal fishing and some other industries. But you are right, there is growing medical things that are going on, and there are definitely growing technology companies here in the Southeast as well. So that's probably part of that growth that you're seeing in the Southeast is some of our technology, because I do know that we're considered like Silicon Valley South in some ways and everything. But I just wonder your thoughts as to what is making this area a growth area, because we've lost some industries like the film industry, which is not as strong as it used to be here in North Carolina.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of that growth in the Southeast is coming from the Northeast. And, other than a couple of superstar areas like Boston and New York, you look at the population and it's being drained, and it's moving to states like North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. I mean, you had South Carolina wound up getting a big chunk of the airline manufacturing when Seattle let Boeing take 10,000 jobs and move them to South Carolina. And when I look at the automobile industry, and I see the remarkable immigration, if you will, of automobiles being made in the South Carolinas and the Tennessees of the world, it's really pretty interesting when you have, whether it's a BMW or Mercedes, and the parts and the cars are being made in the Southeast United States. 20 years ago, you never would have seen that happen.
Do you see green energy being a big deal? Because I know a lot of people are excited about electrical cars and some of the other green energy. And I know that there have even been some windmill kind of plants even here in North Carolina. And there have been some other things that are in that green energy kind of space. So do you think that is going to be one of the growth spaces?
Yeah, although I will tell you, the electric car is of short duration. Remember that electric cars still have to get their energy somewhere, and that's not particularly good. I'm betting over the next 25 years, hydrogen will begin to replace the electric car. And right now, we're not even selling 10% of our cars that are electric. Yeah, in California, we have a lot of Teslas, but most places have virtually no electric cars. So that's just part of history that'll will solve in another 20, 25 years.
Last thing, and then like I said, I'll definitely get you to give your closing ways that you can be reached. But Nick kind of alluded to it in the South, particularly in the not so much the South, but in the West Coast. There are a lot of these social media companies. Some of them have been getting some flack for some of the things that they do and everything. But where are you seeing social media and the technology companies in that sense being in the next half century? Because definitely there have been a lot of attacks around Facebook, Google, and some of the restrictions that they have put on people as well, even though they are part of that web that you are talking about. But I'm just wondering your thoughts as to where that industry will be going, the whole industry of the technology and some of those big technology companies.
The reality is that they're very modern history. I mean, when you look at our history, those industries a quarter century ago weren't there. And they're really just at the cusp of becoming part of the American economy. And things will change over time. 25 years ago, Mark Zuckerman was in college. Mm-hmm. And you look what he has created. And you look at the Googles and all of these other major software firms that have just done remarkable things. And yeah, everybody doesn't like TikTok, but that too will get straightened out over time. So I just look at what we have created as a nation, by the way, in the last half century. And it's been pretty remarkable. So I can only maybe dream of what will happen in the next 50 years because I don't have the ability to think in terms of what will really happen. I can look at demographics, I can look at education levels, but I have no idea what will be created in the next 50 years that will allow the world to expand and prosper.
Yeah, definitely have appreciated your comments and your thoughts and reflections on what the next 50 years can look like and all in that space. If you want to tell folks once again how you can be reached, and of course, we'd love to have you come back on the show in the near future as well, whether it's this one or even possibly because you talk a lot about economic issues, I think, and I don't want to speak for the man, that Sasha might even be interested in having you on his Modern Investment Show, which talks about economy and things along those lines. But we do that show every Wednesday. So it was yesterday at 1 o'clock, and he's not in his head. So it sounds like he'd be willing to have you on that show as well. So I'd love to have you appear on some of our other shows also to give some of your insights and all along those lines.
Of course, you are very welcome.
Delighted to join your crowd.
Thank you.
All right. Tell folks once again how you can be reached, and then we get ready to get on out of here and everything. But if you just tell folks how you can be reached, and like I said, hopefully we'll have you back on in the near future, and maybe even have you on the Economic Show with David Walker on Mondays as well. But there are a number of these shows that I know that you would probably be great conversations with, and all along those lines. But definitely, if you can tell folks how you can be reached.
Well, needless to say, I'd love to have you read my book, and if you do Kindle, it's a cheap read. I think Kindle has it at $6.99. And if you want the full color version, it'll cost you $25. But the reality is it's there for you like everything is on Amazon.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to seeing that book and reading that book in more detail. But I've definitely enjoyed getting some insights on what the book is about and some of your thoughts on this particular show. And we're getting ready to get on out of here. I know we've got a show of Empowering You at 12, and then we've got a recording around that same time of the chess show, which actually airs on Saturdays, but we're going to do the recording on Thursdays, as we oftentimes do, and all in that space. So we've got a number of other shows coming on the podtv.tv, a global network, on today, as well as the rest of the week. And of course, we'll be back with World Edition on tomorrow's edition of World Edition at 10 a.m. But definitely, and we've got World Politics at 5 o'clock. So we might be talking about the debate at that particular time as well. But right now, we're going to get on out of here, and it's been great having the all three of you on, and Alan as our guest, and our regular panelists of Sasha and Jacoby. Lee Newton Rhodes popped in for a hot second, and of course, we also had Nick Palveda. But we're going to get on out of here and continue with some of the other programming later on today. But Alan, it was a pleasure having you, and we look forward to seeing you in the near future.
Thank you.
Bye bye.